Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending where you are. I'll give a few minutes for everyone to get in before we get started. All right, well, welcome everyone to Funding the Mission, Financial Strategies for Housing and Shelter Nonprofit Organizations. Before we get started on today's session, I'd love to introduce who we are and who YPTC is. Your part-time controller is a professional services firm that specializes in nonprofit financial management with more than 30 years of nonprofit expertise. Our services include accounting, reporting, data visualization, and best practices, just to name a few. Our network of almost 800 staff have seen it all, helping close to 2,000 clients throughout the United States, as well as clients in other countries. A few housekeeping items before we dig in. While you have the flexibility to customize your console by repositioning or resizing windows, we recommend that you do not. If you wish to expand the view, try not to do a full screen mode, or you might be unable to see any pop-ups that will come up. By registering for today's event, you will automatically receive an email after 24 hours that will have a link for you to download the slides in a hours. Look for it sometime tomorrow afternoon. And finally, myself and the panelists cannot see or hear you. You can see and hear us. So if you have a question, please submit that through the Q&A widget. It's called Ask the Presenter a Question in the bottom tool. We will do our best to address as many questions as possible, and then there's some time at the end to address questions as well. All right, well, I'm Ashley Garcia. I'm gonna be your moderator for our Q&A session today. I'm a client service manager here at YPTC, but I also lead our housing and shelter vertical specialization. I have extensive experience with both federally funded nonprofit organizations and housing and shelter nonprofits, from both my role as an auditor before working with YPTC and then as a controller with YPTC. I am so excited to be here today, and I'm so excited to be joined by our two panelists. Our first panelist is Amy Ledbetter Parham, who is the CEO of Habitat for Humanity Texas. She has more than 2 decades of experience spanning construction, public policy, and nonprofit leadership. She has developed innovative programs in mortgage servicing, disaster recovery, financial education, and legislative advocacy, and is known for designing practical, high-impact solutions to complex challenges, including the creation of a mission-aligned social enterprise that brings sustainability and scale to Habitat affiliates across the state of Texas. Amy, thank you for being here today. Can you tell us a little bit about Habitat for Humanity of Texas and its mission?
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Ashley. Habitat for Humanity is a state support office. So we don't build houses on the state level, but we support the efforts of the local Habitat for Humanity affiliates across Texas. There's about 60 affiliates that we work with, and we do that through resource development, training and technical assistance, disaster response and recovery efforts, including the most recent Kirk County flooding, and did I say training and technical assistance? And so those are the 4 areas that we work with, and just really enjoy and appreciate the work of the local Habitat affiliates around the state. They are awesome, and it's our honor to be able to work with them.
Thanks, that's amazing, Amy. Our second panelist is Kathy Murray. She is the CFO for CFTH, or the Coalition for the Homeless of Houston-Harris County. She has 33 years in the nonprofit sector, global energy corporations, and public accounting. Before joining CFTH, she served in roles as the Vice President, Regional CFO, Vice President of Treasury and Investor Relations, and Vice President of Tax. Kathy joined CFTH as the CFO to optimize financial reporting, cash flow, and working capital. She also serves on the audit committees of 2 public companies. Kathy, thank you for being here today. Can you tell us about CFTH and their mission?
No, yes, thank you. Thank you, Ashley. I appreciate the opportunity. CFTH was founded in 1982, and it's a 501c3 organization, and we're basically the leader of the homeless response system in our area. Our vision is that everyone in our community has a safe place to call home, but our mission is to act as a catalyst, uniting partners to maximize resources to move people out of homelessness and into permanent housing with supportive services. What I'd say about our work, though, is that we work with dozens of agencies, direct service providers, for those who work with people experiencing homelessness. And we like to describe our work as something like an air traffic controller at an airport. We basically provide the guidance, the coordination for the work for the homeless response system, which we call the way home. We secure and grow funding, so we get a lot of the funding opportunities through the coalition. We do also have a major role in collecting and managing data associated with the homelessness system within our area, which is very important when we work with funders, et cetera, and then solving barriers to housing. The only last thing I would add is that the coalition also fills gaps when our partners cannot be there to fill those needs of our community. And so we do work as a direct service provider on occasion. And that's the coalition in a nutshell.
Thank you, Kathy. Both amazing organizations and integral work that your organizations are both doing. So thank you again for being here. Our discussion today is going to focus on 3 key areas. We're going to discuss economic and housing trends, funding and financial planning challenges, and then some information on innovation and growth opportunities. There are slides associated with this presentation, but it's really conversational with our 2 panelists here who have so many great ideas to share with you. All right, so let's dive in. Our first objective is to review current and emerging trends and challenges. I know the nonprofit sector as a whole is facing many changes and challenges, and nonprofits that provide housing and shelter services are no exception to this. There's potential funding cuts in the federal budget for key programs like the Continuum of Care, rental assistance programs, and home partnership programs. At YPTC, we've also seen our housing and shelter nonprofit clients experience a rise in operational costs due to accumulated inflation for things like rent, utilities, supplies, and staff retention. Housing affordability is always top of mind for both of these organizations, and an increased competition for available funding is also existing. Kathy and Amy, are these trends mirroring what you're seeing at your organization, and what are some of the emerging trends that you're experiencing? Kathy, let's start with you.
That's an excellent question, Ashley. I will tell you that the leadership team at CFTH has been spending a significant amount of our time over the past few months on thinking through how these challenges are going to impact our organization and the community as a whole. I would say that one of the things we're taking the approach that this is definitely a disruption. We know there's things that are beyond our control, but with this disruption, we have an opportunity to really look at different ways of furthering our mission. I would say the key trends that we're looking at now are around a couple of areas. One is around increased collaboration and communication with our key stakeholders, including our funders. We are primarily funded by the city and the county with federal dollars, but also our federal funding directly as well. But we're speaking to funders at the CEO level, at the finance level, and throughout the organizations. We're also working a lot with our organization, so with our employees and our management teams to find different ways of doing things, obviously increasing communication to our board, and working with other partners like our banks, our auditors, YPTC, for example, and other nonprofits. Those are probably the key trends, but in addition to that, we are looking at cost structure reviews. our financial and grant systems, and how they interact with our finance teams, and then just how we can streamline our processes to get us set up for the next phase of work.
Right. Looking at all of those systems and getting that streamlined and in place is really key to dealing with some of these trends. Amy, what about you? How is Habitat for Humanity Texas? What are some of the current and emerging trends that you're experiencing?
Yeah, with the climate issues that we're facing, more and more disasters are happening across the state, which increase housing costs and generally affect low-income neighborhoods more than other neighborhoods. So we expect that trend to continue. Rising housing cost, construction cost. Habitat for Humanity does not build house. The homeowner doesn't pay what it costs to build a home. They pay what they can afford. And so filling that gap between what they can afford and how much it costs has been critically important. And of course, the loss of federal funding. Habitat Texas just had one of our USDA grants that target rural communities canceled last month. And that was a big hit to our budget. But on a more positive note, I think that for the first time, I've been at Habitat Texas in my 13th year now. And for the first time, advocacy has been, the elected officials have been really concentrating on affordable housing and have recognized that it's a crisis. When I first started at Habitat Texas, that is not what was happening. There was an attitude that housing was a private matter and not something that the government sector or nonprofit sector should really even be in. So that trend, I think, is encouraging. There's a lot of good housing bills that came in the legislature that just wrapped up. And that, I think, is one of the most exciting trends that we can look forward to.
Thanks, Amy. So piggybacking off of that, what about challenges? What is one of the key challenges that Habitat for Humanity Texas and its affiliates are experiencing?
Yeah, it really is this uncertainty in public funding. Across the board, we've seen cuts, and that uncertainty, some of the tax code around nonprofit giving, I think, has been a factor in lower donations across the board. There have been some challenges around zoning issues and, again, getting into the policy of minimum lot sizes and unfunded mandates, but also just having employee retention. I've heard from several affiliates in the last few days who are having a leadership transition, but they're not able to hire either lower salary than the for-profit sector or a lack of benefits when you get into small offices, small nonprofits that don't have 4 or 5 or 6 people that would make them attractive to have a benefits package. So there's the challenge facing the nonprofit sector as a whole, which is fewer donations, fewer volunteers. There's the factors that affect housing sector, rising construction costs. 1 in 5 Texans are paying too much for housing. It really is a crisis. That's millions and millions of Texans that are paying too much. Insurance costs, again, because of climate change. There's almost a affordable an insurance crisis in Texas between all the disasters that hit. Property taxes are going up. So that's the kind of, if you think of the entire nonprofit sector challenges, then add that with the affordable housing sector challenges, and then the community challenges of stagnant wage growth and things like that, it really kind of is a perfect storm of challenges.
Thank you, Amy. Kathy, what about you? What are some of the key challenges you're seeing in the homeless response system? Kathy, I think you're muted.
Thank you. I agree with Amy. We're primarily a service organization, and I think talent is one of our, if not challenges, it's one of our areas of focus, because of just, we know that we are moving into a new phase of work, and we're going to need the talent we have now, but also different skill sets in the future. So keeping an eye on that. For us, it's also around finding sustainable funding. Funding with a longer plan gives us a better ability to actually manage our work and get things done. So with the changes in the federal funding, we don't have a direct impact currently, but in the future, not knowing what's going to happen in September when the federal budget appropriations bill gets negotiated, we've got a plan for every scenario. So that is probably our key challenge right now, is just trying to make sure that we're prepared for any outcome.
Speaking on preparedness, the next thing we're going to talk about is how to overcome these challenges, right? Some things that at YPTC we recommend and we've been looking at are, of course, financial planning, budgeting, forecasting, scenario planning, and then how to align your mission with your budget. We've talked about the challenges, but Amy, can you share some examples of strategies you've implemented recently that have assisted you in preparing, planning, and overcoming some of the challenges we've talked about?
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. It's really interesting. I work with boards across the state of Texas, and when you have this budget gap between revenue and expenses, the focus of the board tends to become focus on the expense side, not the revenue side. And I think that that's kind of an easy answer to say, well, what can we cut? Well, with most programs, especially at Habitat Texas, our programs are our people. So if we cut people, we cut programs. And there's really the balance between having to cut. How do we manage that? And one of the things that we look at, we've implemented what's called a sustainability matrix. It's based on a great book. So are the programs that we have, are they the value that we need them to be? Are they sustainable cost-wise? But also juxtaposing the cost of the program with the value to those that we serve. Those have to be conversations held together. It can't just be cost factor, but also to challenge the board of directors to say, look, I've actually had this conversation last week with my board. I've cut back every place I can cut back. Now that's either we cut programs or we increase revenue. We can't only focus on cutting expenses. So we've downsized our office. We've cut some of the programs that are more expensive but don't really have the impact that we want them to have. Working with Habitat affiliates across the state, it's really interesting. We do scenario planning. I've led scenario planning exercises with them. And the boards always tend to, especially Habitat, they tend to always look at the scenario that we're going to get all the money we need and it's going to be great, sunshine and roses. But to also you have to make them look at what happens if we aren't able to meet those forecasts. So having a well-rounded approach to scenario planning and really understanding the impact and the cost of a program, I think is critically important right now.
One question from our audience, Amy, is that you referenced a book around your sustainability matrix. What's the name of that book?
The Sustainability Matrix. So easy to remember. Yeah. Let me and I'll type in who it's by. I want to give good credit. So
awesome. Okay. Kathy, same question. What are some strategies you've implemented at CFTH recently to help you prepare and plan for some of the discussed challenges?
A few things, Ashley. The first I would say is that we've been spending a lot of time with our funders. We've been meeting with our funders as they're going through their budget planning process or preparation, really to understand, so they can understand what we're trying to accomplish and for us to understand what their limitations are. And we've really gotten a lot of good results with that kind of partnership or collaboration. At least we've got a line of sight and communication on what we can be realistically expecting. The other is something that Amy brought up earlier, which is we've been spending a lot of time educating our funders, partners, board, and stakeholders, advocating, if you will, on our mission and the impact of our work on the state of homelessness and what we lose by losing funding. And that, I agree with Amy, that is something that's not been quite as highlighted in prior years, but this year we spent a lot of time in Austin, some time in Washington, and with individual funders, even in philanthropy, to make sure that they have a full view of our impact to the community. And then lastly, as both of you were talking about, we had a financial planning tool, but we've recently implemented a new tool that YPTC actually helped us with, and then took it a step further, took that tool to not just a current year scenario, but a 3-year scenario, and actually looking at cash flows in addition to revenues, and being able to do multiple scenarios, whether the federal funding bill in September takes everything away or just takes some of it away, or we find additional funding sources and what that might look like to the organization. And that gives us effectively a playbook regardless of what happens in the next few months.
That's great. And that tool that you're using, it's called Reach Reporting. It really does help you look at the revenue, the expense, and then ultimately what cash will be as well, which I think is very valuable in that planning process.
Very, very valuable.
All right. All right. So we do have a question here. Both of our panelists, Amy and Kathy, have talked about scenario planning and forecasting and just how beneficial and helpful it has been. So has your organization performed any scenario planning or strategic forecasting? You can click on the pop-up and answer the question for this poll so we can get an idea. Kathy, through the scenario planning process you've been working on with CFTH while our attendees answer this question, how has that been received by the CEO, the board, other leadership at CFTH?
So we're still in the midst of a lot of it. We've done a basic financial plan based on several variables, but I would say that the process will continue through the next few months. But our entire management team, the CEO, our operations team have been very active because, as you know, and as Amy alluded to, the funding is one piece of the puzzle, but the other is, are you going to cut costs? Are you going to cut programs? And those dialogues have to be worked through. It's better to have a financial plan to really kind of base your conversation off of. We have had conversations with our board on what I consider to be like worst case, best case, middle case. But I think there's more to come as we get more information. And that's the nice thing about having a model, is that as that information comes in, you can update your outlook or your view on what the outlook might be real time. But yeah.
Great. And Amy, similar question. As you work with affiliates on scenario planning, how is that received by leadership? Do they find it to be really useful?
They do find it useful just because it forces the organization and the mindset outside of where they naturally go, and having the conversation of what happens if things aren't always sunshine and roses. And the strength of scenario planning is it's not predictive. If you look at scenario planning, it was really kind of revolutionized by a shale oil industry back in the 50s and 60s. And it isn't predictive, but it helps you think through different activities and what ifs, so that you're prepared because you've thought about it, not because you have an active plan. So it's really around thinking more than having an actual written down strategic plan. It's a thought exercise as much as anything. And I think that that's really important during times of disruption and uncertainty, that you have just thought about things. And one of the challenges I think with leadership is that we don't give ourselves enough time to just think and slow down enough to think. and I'm as guilty of that as anybody else. But it does. That's what the scenario thinking exercises do. It just helps us think, not to develop. Here's our 90-day plan. Here's our 6-month plan. Here's where we want to be. It just helps us to think what possible futures are there.
Right. And the value in thinking through that and just having some scenarios and some potential to think through what to do next. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and close this poll. Wow, 67% of you have been performing scenario planning strategic. That's amazing. For those of you that know not yet or I need help, there are some resources at the end of this presentation. We did a webinar here at YPTC about scenario planning. So there's a link to that webinar on our resources slide at the end that might be able to help you with that. All right. So let's talk a little bit about best practices and lesson learned. Each of you have touched on connecting the budget to the programmatic goals of an organization, diversifying revenue, and building those funder relationships. Amy, what are some of the best practices or lessons learned for funding and financial planning that you think have benefited Habitat for Humanity Texas?
Yeah, first of all, we really appreciate our partnership with YPTC, and looking at your budget as not only a planning tool, but also to show funders, to show yourselves what's important to your organization. So, right now we're about to redo our chart of accounts, and we're redoing our chart of accounts to reflect programs and what's important and of value to us. And I've seen a lot of, chart of accounts from different organizations that are kind of stuck in 1992. So don't be afraid to really look at your budget as a planning tool to say, our budget dashboard is broken down by the people and the programs. And I think having that really, really clear is helpful. And again, having like the sustainability mindset matrix, having an emphasis on the budget, but have it tied to the impact of your program is a fantastic way to look at your budget.
Thanks, Amy. Kathy, same question. What are some best practices and lessons learned for funding and financial planning that you believe has benefited CFTH?
Well, I think we've touched on most of them, but the key thing for us is really the collaboration with our funders and our partners. And really, as Amy alluded to, once you have some financial data you can actually base your conversations on, there is an ability to brainstorm and find different ways of doing what you're doing now to get the same or better results. So I think for us, really opening up those lines of communication and seeking input, because we're all kind of in the same boat together, it's an easy way to have those conversations once you have a plan that you can base your conversations on. The other thing I would say is that we have really also been spending a lot of time on the revenue diversification side and thinking through not just our existing funders but around different sources of revenue, whether it is actually in place now, it could be a future state, and then just starting the conversations around how to get from A to C at this point in time. It's more receptive in a period of time when you're looking for revenues than in your normal state of affairs. So I think that's also been a big change from where we've been before.
Yeah, and I think you alluded to this, and I want to highlight this. I think you mentioned it maybe a slide back in one of the questions, is talking to those funders before their budgets are finalized, right? Talking to them when they're in their budget process and explaining to them the key and important work that you each are doing. I think, that's really key is highlighting that.
No, agreed. And being in a dialogue as they're preparing their budgets is a lot different than having the conversation after their budget's been finalized. So, yeah, that's been a very important aspect for us.
Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about innovation and growth, right? Innovative solutions can lead to growth and opportunities. So Amy, can you share examples of innovative solutions that you have seen within Habitat for Humanity Texas and its affiliates that have helped overcome challenges and eventually led to growth?
Yeah, and Ashley, we're in the process of doing that with the board of directors right now. So, for example, almost 2 years ago, we began recruiting a board of directors that would help us understand the capital needs of affiliates on the ground, because the lack of access to capital is one of the most inhibiting functions and factors that nonprofits, and especially housing nonprofits, face. So we began to recruit attorneys in finance. We recruited regulatory board members in banking regulations. We recruited CRA, Community Reinvestment Act specialist from banks. And all of that was geared toward helping us think differently about how we can help affiliates raise capital. So a lot of those initiatives are still in flux and still under development, and some of them have fallen from the wayside. You know, one of our initiatives was really working around federal funding, and that has not come through with the Inflation Reduction Act. One of our initiatives was really around our work in the Texas legislature. That has had some stumbling blocks, although we did have some successes, but not the big access to capital. So right now we're trying to figure out what sort of programs that we can create and that we have control over, and not to rely on individual or corporate donors. So kind of being the master of your own fate is an area that we really want to push into. And that takes, I think, I've always thought that the most important committee on any nonprofit is the nominations committee. And to get your nominations committee or governance committee to focus on bringing people together who can help think through new growth strategies and new areas of innovation.
That's great, Amy. Yeah, I think touching on the importance of a strong board is really key to lead to innovation and growth.
Yes.
Kathy, same question. Share an example or some examples of some innovative solutions that you have seen within the homeless response system in CFTH that have helped overcome challenges or led to growth.
Well, one of the things is we've been looking at, as I said, processes and people. Around processes, we are currently looking at implementing a new financial system. It's an interesting time to do so, but we feel that looking at a new financial system, as Amy had alluded, gives us an opportunity to give us more clarity on our cost base, and also more efficiency in delivering on our programs. And so we're looking currently at a couple of financial systems, but Sage is one of those, to actually bring us that clarity on our grant side. In a view of anticipating some kind of sustainable funding in the near future, we want to have the ability to say to our funders, we have the systems and the people in place that can operate efficiently. So that's one way we're looking at that. The other is, I think, when we talk about the people, we are going through a process of making sure that we're organized in a way that is most effective in getting our programs delivered. And so we're doing some things around who does the work and making sure that they're as close to the programs as possible so that they get the full view of, from the initiation of getting the funding to the spending of the funding to the financial implications of the funding to the compliance, is one process that can give that person a clear view on how to best manage the program effectively. So those are just two things that we're looking at.
And Kathy, can you share what is your top piece of advice on opportunities that you see for nonprofits that provide housing and shelter services?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to kind of what we've been speaking to, which is it's really around focusing on collaboration with your key stakeholders, whether it's your funders, your management team, your operations team, and the board, as Amy alluded to, and using their skills to the best of your ability to look for opportunities during this period of disruption. The other is to look holistically at the funding opportunities, look at your cost structure, and make sure you are at a most efficient structure to deliver whatever the next phase of work looks like. And then lastly is really around skills and talent, knowing that there is possibly a different talent pool that's going to be needed to go into the next phase of work for us, just making sure we develop our people into this next phase of work and that we can identify talent in the market. Because as Amy had alluded to, it's difficult at the moment. There's a lot of tightness in the talent market. So thinking ahead on that as well.
Yeah. Amy, can you, same question, can you elaborate or share advice on where you see opportunities for nonprofits that are providing housing and shelter services?
Yeah, and this gets back to everything we've discussed. There's one of the most well-known or most watched TED Talks is by a man named Dan Pallotta, who wrote, or his TED Talk was called "Everything You Know About Charity Is Wrong." Everything you know about charity is wrong. He's got that TED Talk and made it into an actual documentary called Uncharitable. Spend some time, watch that TED Talk and show it to your board. But really, it's a challenge to rethink the entire nonprofit sector and how we solve these problems. And he gives the example that Amazon or McDonald's, they would not limit themselves to 10% overhead, that they would, to really understand how to solve these big problems, we're going to need investment in people. We're going to need investment in research. We're going to need investment into the programs. And that might mean fundraising. That might mean you pay people what they could get in the for-profit sector. And those are really against how we view nonprofits today, that we're judged by this simplistic term of overhead. I believe that we are in the best country, the most powerful country, the wealthiest country that's ever existed in the history of the world, and we could absolutely solve these problems. We just don't want to. And for whatever reason, we have chosen that we don't want to. So making sure that you're involved as nonprofits, you can get involved in advocacy and the education of elected officials. Not partisan politics or people, but you can get involved. So know the legal requirements and constraints around advocacy, build coalitions, but also don't be afraid to rethink how we think about our job and how we think about our people, that we are worth investing in, and to communicate that well to the larger population, I think is going to be critically important moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you both. I think these responses have, really touched on how to plan and overcome, and a lot of really great calls to action there from both of you. Thank you both. Now let's have some questions. We did get some questions from our audience members. So do either of you use community land trust as a tool to meet housing needs? And could you speak to that?
I don't. I know that several of our affiliates across the state do, but and a lot of the affiliates are doing some permanent affordability work to make sure that that the affordable housing we build remains affordable for future generations. So Habitat Texas doesn't build, but we have had classes on that at our conference. There is a big interest in community land trusts.
Kathy, any work with the homeless response system in utilizing community land trusts?
No, Ashley, because we generally rely on landlords to secure the actual housing itself, that would probably be our landlords who would be interacting with that agency, not the coalition itself.
And then the next question is, you don't have to go into details, but talk a little bit about what is making up most of your funding source. Is that grants, contributions, earned income? Talk a little bit about that. Kathy, do you want to start?
Yeah, so Currently, our funding is the predominantly government funding, and predominantly from the city and the county, from federal sources. We do have some state sources coming through the city and county. We also have direct contracts with HUD, so some federal funding directly. Obviously, we do have a little bit the state, but it's primarily effectively federal for 80% of our funding. And then philanthropy, obviously we have our opportunity at philanthropy funding. We do have an investment account with earning some returns on it that do help our current operating situation. But it's small compared to the biggest revenue line, which is government funded.
Thank you, Kathy. And Amy, similarly, where are you generating a bulk of your revenue from?
Yeah, with the cancellation of our USDA agreement last month, that represented about 20% of our budget. So that was a pretty significant blow. The way Habitat is funded, it's very challenging for the state office. We don't want to compete with affiliates on the local level. And the national level, we can't compete for funding, corporate funding on the national level. So my counterparts around the country, they often get state funding. That hasn't been much of an option in Texas. So that means we really rely on earned income, and that could be a lot of fee for service. Now, my guess is the question is really how do local habitats fund themselves? And that is a combination of government programs, earned income from mortgage payments that are coming in. Habitat homes aren't free. They're just affordable to the homeowner. And then philanthropic dollars is how the local habitats get funded. And they're fairly well diversified, I would think, say between those three areas.
Thank you. All right. A quick recap. Thank you both so much for participating in this really important conversation around financial management strategies for nonprofits that provide housing and shelter services. We were able to touch on emerging trends, particularly around increased collaboration, communication with stakeholders, funding difficulties, and the importance of reviewing the cost structure and looking at those increase in operational costs. Next, we covered challenges such as identifying sustainable funding sources, diversifying your funding sources, particularly around the disruption in federal funding. And then we spent some great time discussing opportunities with scenario planning, collaborating with funders to achieve your mission, streamlining, building a strong board, and all of that has been wonderful. Thank you both so much again for being here. Here's a resource slide today with some information that we've touched on today, such as some of our federal funding resources, some information on the tax and budget bill, a webinar on demystifying federal funding, and some nonprofit questions answered, and then a scenario planning webinar. Just a quick note, this webinar is not CPE eligible, so when you receive your slides and your recording of our session today, there will not be a CPE certificate. Thank you both again for being here, and thank you all for attending today's session.
Thanks, Ashley.
Thank you so much.